Okay. Yay! Okay, cool. All right, guys. So study group time. So we are reading A Course in Miracles for those of you who have been following along, and I am reading the annotated version of the annotated version by the Circle of Atonement. It's a little bit different from the traditional Course in Miracles. The one that I have also includes all of Helen Schumann's notes when she created the Course in Miracles. And then, of course, the version that most people are familiar with is the version that is edited, and all of her notes were edited out. So it's a lot shorter, but there's a lot of extra stuff in the main book that I did not want to not know about. So that's why I got the annotated version of it. So the last time we left off, I was in the process of going through chapter 2. Since I actually went back over it because I felt like when I was reading through it, because the last time we were doing it, I hadn't had the chance to run through it. I ran through it yesterday night, and I got a lot more information from it that I kind of want to go back over. So I'm going to kind of go back over what we talked about the last time, and then I'm going to break it down because I have a crap load of notes to talk about as well. So for those of you who are tuning in, who are wanting readings, guys, that was the last hour. So this is our study group time. We are reading A Course in Miracles. If y'all are tuning in for a reading, you're going to have to come back on Friday because that was last hour. So Friday, same time, same place. All right. So chapter 2 in A Course in Miracles was really interesting because chapter 2, the focus of chapter 2 was right defense and release from fear, the real meaning of possession. Automatically, as soon as people hear the word possession, by default, they go into a bit of a fear mode because most of us have been conditioned to immediately, when we think of the word possession, we think of like The Exorcist or like these films that, the Haunting of Emily Rose, all these other types of productions or Hollywoodized versions of possessions. Now, as I was reading through this, some things that stood out is that the way that they're referring to it is that we all essentially most of us, if not all of us, suffer from different forms of possession throughout the different courses, the different periods in our life. Not talking about like demonic possession. We're talking about energetic possession. Energetic possession can fixate on different things. And so this kind of breaks it down for all of us so that way we can kind of understand it. I'm going to go back over and read some of this because I kind of want to break it down further for you guys. So chapter 2, the real meaning of possession should be clarified. Fear of possession is a perverted expression of the fear of the irresistible attraction of God. The truth is still that the attraction of God is irresistible at all levels, and the acceptance of this totally unavoidable truth is only a matter of time. But you should consider whether you want to wait, because you can return now if you choose. Possession is a concept which has been subject to numerous distortions, some of which we will list below. Type 1 possession can be associated with the body only. If this occurs, sex is particularly likely to be contaminated. Possession versus being possessed is apt to be seen as the male versus the female role. Since neither will be conceived of as satisfying alone, and both will be associated with fear, this interpretation is particularly vulnerable to psychosexual confusion. Type 2 possessions, from a rather similar reference point, possession can also be associated with things. This is essentially a shift from type 1 and is usually due to an underlying fear of associating possession with people. In this sense, it is an attempt to protect people from one's possessiveness, like the superstition about protecting the name we mentioned before. Both type 1 and type 2 are likely to become compulsive for several reasons, including they represent an attempt to escape from the real possession drive, which cannot be satisfied this way. B, they set up substitute goals, which are usually reasonably easy to attain. C, or third, they appear to be relatively harmless and thus seem to allay fear seem to allay fear. The fact that they usually interfere with good interpersonal relationships can be interpreted in this culture as a lack of sophistication on the part of the other, not the self. And this induces a false feeling of confidence in the solution. It is also fairly easy to find, let me turn this off over here because Christmas music's throwing me off a little bit. I'm not singing Christmas. I'm trying to study. Okay. It is also fairly easy to find a partner who shares the illusion. Thus, we have any number of relationships which are actually established on the basis of type 1 and others which hold together primarily because of a joint interest in type 2. The manifestly external emphasis which both entail seems to be a safety device and thus permits a false escape from much more basic inhibitions. As a compromise solution, the illusion of interpersonal relating is preserved, along with the retention of lack of love. This kind of psychic juggling leaves the juggler with a feeling of emptiness, which in fact is perfectly justified. Because he is acting from scarcity, he then becomes more and more driven in this behavior to fill the emptiness. So I'm going to stop there for a second because I want to go back over some of these notes here. Because if you don't understand, first of all, when I was reading this, it made it very clear that this section of the book has to do a lot more with the psychological dysfunctions or the challenges that we sometimes deal with in this form and on this level, and how the different forms of possession associate with the different psychological issues or states. So it kind of goes into it and breaks it down into detail. So here's what I wrote. These are my notes. So the real meaning of possession as perspective beings, perspective meaning we're here in physical form to have a perspective and experience through this beingness. So for example, I was born into the personality and form of Fernando, Ferny, so that I could experience life through this beingness. So I'm myself for the purpose of serving Source or God. So that's what I mean when I say perspective beings. We're a perspective being. We experience through our perspective, which is the form of our being. As perspective beings, we long for the irresistible connection and union with God and Source. In other words, the moment we come here and participate in this reality, this matrix reality, physical life, we automatically have the illusion built in that we are separate from God and we're not connected and we're not part of Source, that we're individuals, that we're alone, that we're here. So that's a struggle that we all suffer from. So as perspective beings, we long for the irresistible connection and union with God or Source. Possession, therefore, is a process of fear that connection and is let me repeat that. Possession, therefore, is a process of fear of that connection and is complicated by the mind variables of the individual. So when this speaks about being possessed, it means being possessed by different states of consciousness and different states of psychological dysfunction. Type 1 possession, which is let's call it type 1 spiritual psychological dysfunction, is pertaining to the body and physical pleasurable conditions, meaning that when people are possessed by type 1 issues or challenges, they tend to have a fixation with their bodies, whether they're too skinny, they don't have enough curves, they want more muscles, they want to have perfect skin, so it's all body related. It's all the consuming of being overly attached to our physical body. People who are stuck in that state or stuck with that type of possession, it essentially affects that person's mindset and what is a priority for them in their lives. So people who spend all of their energy trying to have their body look a certain way, have themselves seem a certain way, look a certain, etc., having the experience of sex, having the experience of when you have an erection, like all of these physiological experiences are part, and the obsessiveness with it is part of a type 1 possession or a type 1 spiritual psychological dysfunction. Type 2 possession is pertaining with the pleasure and obsession of things. So type 2, it has less to do with the physical body, it has more to do with the idea of things, where we get obsessed with things. I want to have more money. I want to be wealthy. I want to be rich. I want to be famous. I want to have this car. I want to have this person. Like all of that falls in to type 2 psychological spiritual dysfunctions. So it's the idea of wanting to control or have things. Both forms of possession are set up by the mind so that they are seemingly easy to achieve and would resolve the desire or need. In other words, we come up with the idea that if I just have this thing, or if I just have this appearance or body, or I have this physical experience with my body, or if I just have this person, then all will be well in the universe. That's the illusion. That is the trap that people get stuck with. So I'm sure all of us can relate to that because all of us, I believe, have suffered from that in one way or another. So that is what is meant when it's acknowledging. We're talking about how in our minds, it seems like an easy fix. If I just have this thing or this person, if I just have this physical experience, or if I just look this way physically, then all of my problems are solved, or I will have a sense of I will have a perfect state. And that is an illusion. That is false, because it is our way of believing that we essentially can have the same experience of having unity with God, with Source, when we were back in spirit form before we were born, and after we die, going back into that state, to that heavenly state, the divine state. It sets up the illusion that if we just achieve these goals, then we will experience this sense of, union and divinity with God, a state of perfection. And that's the illusion. So both forms of possessions are set up by the mind so that they are seemingly easy to achieve and would resolve the desire or need. They act as a form of substitute for a pleasurable experience that can replace the desire of union with God, as I mentioned. Once the goal is achieved, the cycle is repeated as the resolve or pleasure of the initial possession or goal diminishes. In other words, as soon as we achieve the goal, in some cases doing it, because we got plenty of people who are able to get that person that they were wanting to get, or have that thing they were wanting to have, or achieve that physical experience of pleasure they were wanting to achieve, or have that body type that they were wanting to have. As soon as a person achieves it, the idea is that that's it. You're in a state of perfection, but it doesn't happen. People don't achieve the state of perfection. In fact, they actually, once they achieve it, that's it. That's done. Then they start to, after the initial feelings of accomplishment or achievement wear off, there's a void that begins to take hold. There's a pattern of emptiness that begins to arise within the individual. And at that point, the individual has to decide, do I go within to try to figure out where this emptiness is coming from and what I can either do or what I can work towards to resolve the sense of emptiness, or should I try for something bigger, try for another person, try for another body type or another goal in my body, try for another physical encounter that gives me a sense of pleasure, try for achieving a bigger thing. Like instead, most people tend to they build up the goal into another stage of it. So they basically create a new goal, which is essentially the same thing, which causes the cycle to repeat itself. And so we find ourselves in like a wheel. We're constantly trying to achieve the same thing over and over and over again, thinking that it's going to resolve our sense of disconnect and our feeling of void or emptiness, but it doesn't. It only gives us a temporary sense of relief, and then we find ourselves repeating the process, thinking that it's going to fix things again if we just go for something bigger or go for something grander. So where was I at here? So these possessions can also give birth to relationships based on this flawed dynamic of a type 1 possession. Relationships can remain intact due to occurrences of type 2 possessions. Relationships established based in type 1 possessions tend to fall out of love as they are established from a basis of scarcity and lack of love. They feel empty, as if they are missing something after some time. In this turn causes This in turn causes individuals in relationships to seek other opportunities to fill the void due to the lack of love fulfillment, God source fulfillment. This is why I tell people, if you are desiring for a romantic relationship or a life partner or, a spouse or, a marriage or whatever, if you are desiring for these things, you better have a very clear understanding of what it is you're actually desiring or wanting to have. Because if you are going into a relationship thinking that being with this person is going to fix all your issues, then you're completely mistaken. If you go in trying to achieve a particular person, or I want this person to be in my life, they have to be in my life, thinking that once that person's in your life, all of these feelings of void or the emptiness is going to go away, it doesn't. It actually gets bigger, because that person is not going to fill the void that is meant to be filled by your awareness of your connection and unity with Source or God. You cannot replace the unity and the experience of divine love and perfect connection and unity with God or with Source with a human relationship. It's not enough to fill in that gap. It's a massive gap. And the gap isn't there because this person's not in your life. The gap is there because you are under the impression that you are not connected with the divine. You are not connected with that heavenly state. You are in a state of lack. And so you're reaching for anything that might help you to fill in that void, which is why people tend to become obsessed with relationships, especially those of us who are younger. When we're in our early 20s, maybe in our teenage years, we fall in love with the idea of being in love because we think that having the experience of a loving relationship is going to fulfill all of our needs on that spiritual energetic level, and it does not. So many people find themselves going into these relationships thinking that it's enough and it's going to solve all of their needs, and it doesn't, and then they start to feel empty. And not only that, at some point, in many relationships, because I know this from experience with clients, a lot of people tend to run off and go and try to connect with someone new or someone else because they either do not feel satisfied with their relationship or there's still that gap or that void. So they think it's going to get filled if they just find another person or someone else that's better. And it doesn't really work either. And so you end up having these, you end up having these serial, these guys who are like serial cheaters, or also women, because women are cheaters as well. You have these people who become serial cheaters. They keep jumping from one person to the next, even if a person's not in a relationship. Some people jump from relationship to relationship to relationship because they're trying to fill that void, that missing sense of connection with Source and divine love. They're missing that, and so they're trying to replace it in those first moments of a new connection, a new bond, a new sense of love with someone. Never gets filled and it never stops, and it just becomes this ongoing wheel over and over and over and over again, because you're not going to get that sense of fulfillment from someone else or from the thing. It's like people, like I'm going to do one more show or one more song, and there's constantly that drive and that push to continue to move forward and to move forward and to move forward, wanting to achieve the next great thing, the next great thing, the next great thing. And you never really completely get fulfilled by that next great thing. And then you keep pushing yourself thinking that the next great thing is going to be it. And it isn't. It turns out to be just as empty as if you achieved the first thing. These states of possession, and called possession, again, spiritual, psychological dysfunction, these states of possession become beliefs in what brings the individual a sense of fulfillment, even if they are temporary. This illusion in a sense of completeness through these behaviors cause dysfunction and produce sexual crimes, hoarding, and let's go in here. Okay. These states of possession become beliefs in what brings the individual a sense of fulfillment, even if they are temporary. This illusion in a sense of completeness through these behaviors cause dysfunction and produce sexual crimes, hoarding tendencies, and theft. So this is why some people commit sexual crimes, because they believe that the physical pleasure or the experience of their actions are going to fulfill this gaping hole in their being in this physical world, and it never does. But they do so at the expense of other people. And so they are driven by this desire that essentially forces them to become desperate and take these actions that are unjustifiable. Same thing with people who are hoarders. These people who are hoarders, and I know we all know people who are hoarders. I've had plenty of family members who are hoarders. They keep accumulating because they believe that the accumulation of things, if I just have one more thing, or if I just have this thing or that thing, it's going to fill in that gaping hole. Some of you who have shopping addictions, where you're constantly just spending money or buying stuff because you feel the incessant need to do so. It's this desire to fill this gaping hole within your being, because you feel that void of source and of awareness with divine state, that you're trying to fill it with something. And if you get a little kick or a little bit of a upward tick in this sense of pleasure or sense of satisfaction from that purchase, you're going to continue to do it, thinking that it's going to solve everything, and it doesn't. It just creates more issues for you as well. Also, theft. People who steal. If people who see others, they assume because they have these things, if I just have those things like those people and having those things, it's going to be like I am one of those people, or I am able to experience some joy just like those people. So this is why people go and they want to steal. Now, sometimes people steal, of course, because they have needs and they don't have the resources or the means to purchase or to buy what they need. But in other instances, it's just the accumulation of things that I want something you have, and I feel like, why do you deserve it when I should have the same thing? I know inside at the deepest recesses of my being, I know that I am just as deserving of these wonderful, great things as you are. And so I'm going to take what you have, because it's not fair that you get to have it and I don't. And so there's this mindset that if I just fill in my life with these things, I'm going to be worth more. I'm going to have more value. I'm going to have more of a sense of pleasure or a sense of joy or a sense of happiness or love, which is what we're ultimately seeking with Source or with God. People may not know that that's where that's all coming from on a conscious level, but that is where it's coming from. Let's see. So maintaining that the illusion that the physical is all there is produces depression. Those of us who believe that this physical world is all there is and there's nothing other than this can bring a lot of us to depression, because some of us realize that this is not, who we stare at in the mirror is not a true reflection of who we are. And we feel the difference. We feel the discord inside of us. And when we're looking at ourselves, immediately there's a ringing of truth and authenticity, or there's a ringing of feeling inauthentic and feeling lost. And so when you feel that way, the reason for you feeling that way is because there's a sense that what is all there is, or all that there could be. And that's not true. First of all, you have the opportunity to completely transform and change your life if you want to. You can reinvent yourself if you need to. Madonna's done it plenty of times. Lady Gaga's done it plenty of times. I've reinvented myself a couple of times in my life when it no longer served who I was at the time. So you can reinvent yourself in alignment with the authentic version of yourself. So this world is not all there is. But if you buy into that this is all there is and everything is set in stone, then it can force people to become depressed because they don't see an exit, and it starts to feel like we're in a prison when we're not. It's the illusion that we are. And that's what you have to understand. This is all an illusion. Number two, investing in the physical experience through non-physical mindsets produces anxiety and a leaning towards magical systems. In other words, those of us who feel that this is all there is, we're trying to find a way to control things. We're trying to find a way to shift and force something to change. And people who can't do it by making different choices, taking different actions, going in a different direction intentionally through their behaviors, etc., if they feel like that's not the way they can make a change, then people tend to latch on to the idea of magic, or the idea of using and I don't want to say made up, because I don't want to say, oh my God, magic is not real. You can't, you can't use magical stuff, because I know there's plenty of people who practice magic. But the way I want to say it is the idea that you need magic to change and transform the world or yourself or your experience is also an illusion and is not necessary. But people tend to buy into it or believe in it or become engaged with it because they believe it is their way out of the prison of permanency that they are stuck in. So they're looking for a way to use nature, to use the energy of the universe, to use the magic of this world to shift things in their favor. So this is another reason why I tell people I don't like to depend on tools. I don't like to depend on crystals. I don't like to depend on cards. I don't like to depend on tools to sense things, to tap in, to tune in, because it is what Aja has told me, my higher self. You do not need tools to achieve these connections with information and knowledge and awareness. These tools are ways to trigger and to help you to practice that, but you don't need it. You don't need it. And so this is why I don't really promote the use of tools. If you like them, if you enjoy them, continue to do that. Some people enjoy some of these things. There's nothing wrong with that, but you don't need it. But a lot of people will buy into the idea that there's a magical reason why things are happening. This also creates the idea of how some people feel like they're cursed or like they're being forced into something, or that the circumstances of their life, for example, the young lady that I talked to earlier in the live, where things just weren't working out in her favor for a while and they were going through a lot of drama, people easily can say, well, this must be a curse, or someone must have put a hex on me, because there's no way that all these crappy things can be happening in my life. It's just too coincidental. And what I say to people is, whenever something happens and it is an experience or negative experience, we tend to have other negative experiences around that event, because that one experience triggers a reaction within us, and we either align with that negative experience where we unintentionally support the vibration of that, or we tend to just, no, I'm going to do the very best I can, and I'm not going to sit here and stress over it. But those of us who tend to become obsessed or emphasize that there's something wrong that's going on tend to create the illusion of magic. Like, it must be a hex, or it might be someone casting a spell on me. I'm not saying that doesn't happen and people don't do that. I'm just saying that more times than not, it is the belief in a curse or in a magical spell or something that people latch onto, which is an illusion, than the actual event of someone trying to hex you or whatever. And even then, if someone ever tried to hex you, there are spiritual laws that protect an individual. No one is allowed to energetically force you to experience negativity. You have to be aligned to that. And if you are mentally and emotionally open to it because you feel vulnerable, you feel open, you don't feel protected, you're inviting in all of that negativity, and it's going to continue to perpetuate. It's going to continue to get stronger. It's going to happen more and more often. So you need to shift that. And that's what I try to tell people whenever I tell them, go watch The Secret. You need to understand energy. You need to understand how you are contributing to the experiences that you're having. Vacillating between both produces a starvation effect of love for the individual. In other words, people who buy into the illusion that this physical world is all there is and nothing can change the reality of this universe, of this world, physical world, this physical matrix, energy matrix here. When people buy into the illusion that this is all there is and will ever be, that there is no other form or way of existing, that there is no consciousness separate from the body, that there is no God, that there is no exit out of this state, and then also buying into the idea that there is the potential of magic, vacillating between these ideas that maybe it's supernatural, no, maybe it's a physical, maybe it's supernatural, then at that point you start to get a lot of you start to essentially teach yourself further disconnection with your highest self, with God, with source form, with the unending feeling of connection and love that is there for us, that is always available to us to tap into. We begin to starve ourselves from that connection, and we buy further and further and further into these illusions. And that begins to become an issue for us. So type 3 possession is an investment. So type 3 possession, or type 3 spiritual psychological dysfunction, is an investment by the individual in the idea that both prior forms of possession are not chosen. And this is what I'm talking about with the idea of being cursed. but cemented in reality and are affecting one's ability for unity with God and Source and the full experience of love. Vacillations, meaning jumping back and forth between these states or mental ideas, between vacillations between grandiosity and fear are common. Elements of projection mixed with religious identity by the individual are present and supported by the belief and identity of a broken spirit. Witchcraft or forced magical leanings are also common in an attempt to identify the source of this energetic mental error and feedback loop. So this is where you start to get into people who start to suffer from these forced mental states or forced physical experiences. So they buy into it and they build into that that's real and that's 100% the case. And they start to struggle because at that point, their core being, all of us in this physical form, there's a consciousness within us. And in that consciousness, there's a core awareness. There's a core beingness of truth that is within all of us. And that core beingness tells us that we are not alone, that we are more than we believe we are, and that we are all connected and that we are source. That core being knows the truth. But when we are not consciously aware of that, and when we operate from the mindset that everything physical is real, that what we're going through is real, that this is all there is, there's a fight that happens between us, within us. And there's the side of us that knows the truth, and there's the side of us that doesn't understand consciously and has bought into the illusions. So the fight starts to occur, and we start to have this weird shifting back and forth, that I know that I'm more, but this is all that there is. And so this is the reality. This is when you start to have people build into the idea or create the illusion, a further illusion, that they're that special that the universe is intentionally trying to hurt them. That they're that special that God has chosen to punish them specifically. That they're that special that the devil is intentionally focused on that person's misery. That they're that special that the reason why they don't have all of these wonderful experiences and amazing things is because they're so special that they are the target of all of the negativity in this world. So that's when you start to have this weird change and dynamic shift in a person where they start to build a sense of grandiosity. Like, I'm that special that this is why this is happening to me. That is a complication and an additional layer of disconnect from Source and from God. So not only have people bought into the illusion, they've created an identity within the illusion. That is such a really challenging place to be in. And also, it is probably not the healthiest, because at that point, this is when you find all of the victims. This is where a majority of the people who are like everlasting victims reside in. We all know those people who, no matter what they do, everything will always be against them. Everything will always be against them. These are these eternal victims, and they've fallen into that category of possession or of spiritual psychological dysfunction, where that now becomes their norm. Type 4 possession involves the glorification of knowledge and reduces the validity. Oh, and by the way, type 3 possession is when we encounter people who start having the types of possessions that we have heard about or have seen on movies, where their behavior becomes really erratic. It's like they're possessed by something demonic or evil, and they're acting out in these ways, and because they're in conflict with themselves. But that's when we start to find these occurrences with people who are suffering those states or conditions of psychological dysfunction. Type 4 possession involves the glorification of knowledge and reduces the validity of emotional experience. Having knowledge is more desirable than a lack of knowledge. Having knowledge makes you invulnerable and ensures a measure of control. Having knowledge makes you more valuable than the lack of knowledge. All possessions also include denial mechanisms, which work in the reverse, for example. So go back to type 4 possession. So in other words, type 4 possession, where it's not about things, it's not about people, it's not about magic or the supernatural, it's about knowledge. The more I know, the more I understand, the more educated I am, the smarter I am, then this becomes their possession. These people are using that in a way to feel what they can feel at the highest level, which is nothing compared to what happens when you're in connection with Source and with God. When you're in connection with Source and with God, all that knowledge, all that information is available to you. You don't have to be smart. You just have to be aware that you are part of Source or God, and the knowledge is there because it is part of the universal knowledge bank. We all have access to that. But people who glorify knowledge as if, and this is where we get into people who are not religious, who are they're like a bunch of smartasses. All they do is just make smartass comments, and they point out how everybody is wrong, how they're right, and how their intelligence supersedes or is better, makes them better, or makes their experience more valuable or more worthy of great things than the people who don't have that knowledge or have that information. So they use that, they use their smarts as a way to establish their sense of value, and they try to rise to the level of feeling pleasure from that. There's a pleasure that comes from, I'm smarter than them, and poor ignorant fools. Like, that's that mindset, and that's what it's talking about there. But those people feel that they have control of something, that having knowledge or having smarts gives them a sense of control over things. And it doesn't, because just because you know something or understand something, or you are intelligent enough to grasp a concept or an idea, doesn't mean that you have control of the universe. But the illusion, the possession, is that, well, as long as I know everything or see or I'm able to understand everything, I have some control over reality. And you don't have control. You have no control over anything. So all possessions also include denial mechanisms which work in the reverse. For example, the type 1, which is the obsession or possession of the physical body or physical pleasure. So the opposite of that, which is still the same form of possession, but in the opposite and the reverse, means the embracing of physical limitations or impotency, meaning people who use their illnesses, their conditions, their physical struggles as a way to amplify their value, their worth, or their importance. People who use their physical conditions, their ailments, their disabilities as a way to establish how much more valuable or how special they are. That's the reverse of it. But it's still the same thing in reverse as the type 1, which is being in love with the body, being obsessed with that. So the inability, because of the limitations of the body, is the reverse, but it's still the same kind of possession. Type 2, bankruptcy mindsets, feelings of limitation of resources, also the vacillating between accumulating and disposing of, possessiveness and insatiable need to throw away things, gamblers, alcoholics, drug addicts, food addiction. The addict's perceptual changes introduce another layer of complexity which produce breaks from the possession state. In other words, you have people who are, if I can just, make that money or have that good paying job or win the lottery or be rich or be famous or have that person, etc. It's the reverse also, where it's also the same possession, but it's in the reverse. Like, I'm just too poor and I'm part of the 99%, and that entitles me. I'm special because of that. Or I don't have the ability to go and do this for myself. Or I don't have the funds to be able to do this. Or I don't have the same opportunities. I don't have the same funds to be able to achieve this. I don't have the same kinds of relationships. All of my relationships are crap. All the people that I have in my life are crap. So that's the same process, but in the reverse. So it's almost the sense of trying to force a sense of completeness, but through the reverse. This is the area. This is my struggle as well, because I'm a type 2. That's the area that I fall into category. Because in my life, I have exhibited a sense of like, okay, I buy a bunch of crap and then I end up giving it away or end up getting rid of it because I have too much crap. So there's that vacillating between the two. And so this is a textbook example of what this is saying, that whenever I've gone through those periods in my life, it was because I was trying to feel that connection with Source and with God by the purchasing and the accumulating of things. But then when I realize those things are not going to fulfill me in the long term, and I don't continue the cycle of purchasing, then I go through these purges where I try to get rid of, or, let go, of a lot of things. So it's that vacillating between the two. So that's also part of the issue, or the trap that we can get into also as well. Type 3, one aspect of the psychological state rises above others. And this is the one that was talking about the possession that we see in movies, and the people who, like, oh, I'm like this, they're all like acting crazy. So this is what this is referring to in the reverse, where type 3, one aspect of the psychological state rises above others and is incorporated with a form of paranoia. If being possessed by outside forces becomes the prominent possession, then the byproduct of persecution takes hold. The possessed person becomes a form of persecutor, where they're basically pointing a finger at everyone that is hurting them, or everyone that has caused pain towards them. But at the same time, they also begin to persecute themselves from the inside out, which starts to create this trend of being possessed by a demon or a negative spirit or whatever. So it's a energetic psychological malfunction and error within that person brought about their type of spiritual dysfunctional state. The possessed becomes a form of persecutor, outweighed from a heightened state of being persecuted. Feeling attacked from others becomes an obvious component. This includes the identifying paranoid state with belief systems, including evil systems, opposite of what represents love or source in God, such as demons. It may lead to a catatonic state if the primary possession is not resolved, or an overemphasis of a projection form. This extreme vacillation between love and fear, completeness and lack, is an obvious attempt by the consciousness to unify into oneness, but is inhibited by the transition between energetic extremes. So, for example, you have people who, let's use myself for example. I did go through a period because I was able to do what I do. I was able to speak to spirits. I was able to see the future, to sense details that were correct. Because I was able to do that for a period in my life, in my earlier years, I let it go to my head, and it actually really, really like blew my ego up. And so I was using it to establish a sense of like specialness. Being that is a demon that has inhabited that person's energy and taken him over is because that person's inner demons, that person's inner state of persecution, that person's inner state of paranoia, that person's inner extreme, that they are that special, that they are being targeted by evil, has become so powerful a belief system for them that it begins to affect that person's energetic state, that person's psychological state, that person's physiological state. And that becomes an energetic trend within them, and it starts to create these circumstances and situations where that person does lose control. They do start to suffer from mental illness. They do start to have these moments where they look like they're being controlled by some sort of outside demonic force, but it is coming from within. It isn't coming from without, because it is that person who has triggered that to take place, and they haven't taken responsibility for that. They haven't acknowledged the bad choice or the bad buy-in to the illusions. They haven't taken responsibility or accountability for their part in that, and they are simply feeding the illusions further. So it becomes something that seems like it's an external, but it's not. It's actually coming from within. So that vacillation between the two states of like, I know I'm a good person. I know that I deserve love. I know that I deserve to be with God. But at the same time, I'm an evil person, or there's something deep inside of me that is evil, that is wrong, that is bad. The fight starts to happen where you have the good versus the bad, the angel versus the demon. So that's that inner fight that starts to happen. And the reason why it starts to happen is because the core being of the individual, the core within us, knows ourselves to be divine, knows ourselves to be source, to be God. And that part of ourselves will not let go. That part of ourselves will not release us from the truth that we are God. that we are source, that we are love, and we are all united in that. That core part of us is never going to go away, but it starts to fight against. There's a battle that starts to become waged between that and this illusion that people have bought into. That's when we get these crazy periods and these crazy experiences with people who seem like they're possessed. What resolves that and what will help to dispel that and help to heal the person from that state is their acknowledgement and acceptance of what they've bought into, of what they've essentially supported, of what they are essentially embracing from a deep psychological level. And once they begin to acknowledge their part in that and take responsibility for that, at that point, you can no longer hand over those errors, the error within you that is trying to correct itself with this state of craziness. It starts to dispel, because once you begin to assume your responsibility and your sense of control from a divine state, once you acknowledge your divinity and your form of sourceness, it starts to essentially dissolve the illusion. It may not happen overnight. It may not happen very quickly. Some instances when you got people going to priests or whatever, the priest represents that part of themselves that is fighting for them. But at the same time, they're fighting that priest. And so that's where that battle, Jesus, when people say, in the name of Jesus Christ, etc., Jesus just represents, again, that divinity within us, that part of ourselves that is pure love. That is what is represented by that. Now, some people who have no connection or feel a sense of bond with Jesus don't even know who Jesus is. They may never be even positively impacted by any kind of exorcism, because that's what an exorcism essentially is. It's releasing that negative burr that is stuck within that person's psychology and their energetic state. But there are times when people, even though they weren't religious, but they knew what Jesus represented, because they, were born in a part of the world where Jesus was something that was, associated with goodness or, the righteous path or whatever. Even just using that can also represent that goodness within them that is tapping into that core beingness of divinity. Type 4, the assuming of the opposite is also possible, as a lack of knowledge could enforce the idea of a kind of importance within the identification of fear and lack. For example, these secrets are for important or anointed ones. I'm so special in that it's intentional that I'm not a chosen one. So the idea that you're not smart enough to be able to understand something is a form of possession in the reverse, where it's not the having of knowledge, it's actually the lack of knowledge that creates the sense of grandiosity. Or I didn't grow up in this, I didn't graduate college, so I don't have a college background. Or I am not able to read, and so because I'm not able to read, then, I'm special. And that, so all of these reverse positions are also the same with those different forms of possession or these different forms of spiritual psychological dysfunction. They all affect us, and all of us in one way or another have suffered from these different states. And so we wonder what is life really about? Is this all there is? When you start to ask yourself those questions, is this all there is? Is there more to life than just the accumulation of things or the having of people or relationships? Is there more? What is true? What is the truth behind all this? I want to experience the authentic form of love. I want to experience the authentic version of God, which is what I did. That is what an awakening is. It is you awakening to the understanding and the truth that you are not these possessive states, that this is not all there is, that is not what life is, that is the illusion that is a part of the illusion of life. And so that is what is represented by that. So you have these people who have bought into all of these conspiracies. That is also a form of possession. So, you have people who believe in religion as if it's the only religion. There's no answer beyond what this book has shared with me. Whatever's in the Bible is the gospel. It's everything. Nothing can exist or is possible without that. That idea or that mindset is a possession of knowledge where what you think you know makes you bigger, better, more special, more loved in the eyes of God. It is a state of lack that is being experienced in. Is not true. These people who buy into these conspiracy theories, this person is so important and they're going to change the world, or that person, or, etc. We're all being controlled by the cabal. All these ideas about these conspiracies I'm not saying that some of these don't have a basis in fact or that there isn't any reality to some of these, just like with the spiritual experiences from some of the religions. What I am saying is a lot of people have bought into this because they're under a form of possession by the understanding that if I just know the truth, if I'm woke, then I am special, or I'm in the know, or I am in alignment with God, or I am, it's a false sense of self, and it's coming from a state of lack. Understanding those things, these, stories, these beliefs, etc., do not make you more connected to God, because once you form more unity with God, because it's always there for us, we just have to be aware of it and actually reach for it. Once we do that, then we start to feel differently, and we don't see our brothers and our sisters, we don't see each other as the enemy, we don't see each other as something less than. We don't see each other as something to be crushed. We see God in each other. We see love in each other. We see the unity and the connection in each other. And we realize that we are all on a journey. We are all in a state of being that we all need to be going through for the purpose of our own soul's evolution, for the purpose of our own understanding as source in physical form. So when you are truly awakened, when you are truly enlightened, when you are truly woke, you do not have a sense of wanting to destroy anyone before you. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to have human experiences and you're not going to go through periods where you react to people and you get angry with others, or you feel like you want to slap that shit out of somebody else. That doesn't mean you're not going to have human experiences or reactions. We're still in physical form. We're going to suffer the human condition while we're here. But when you're truly woke, it is not a conscious state of being. So for those of you who believe that the knowledge you possess, or the awareness that you have, or the information about all of these like underlying secret realities, secret government, secret things make you more enlightened, make you more ascended, make you woke, that's a falsehood. It's coming from a place of scarcity, y'all. So it's not really being woke. It's actually the opposite. It's the opposite of it. It is actually further taking you into a state of lack and a state of disconnection. And if you ask a lot of people, for example, and I'm going to use this because this is a perfect example of this, there are a lot of people who believe that Donald Trump is a savior, that he's here to save mankind, save all of us, that he is the savior. People believe that because that is what they have bought into. That is the illusion that they bought into. And so now that he has lost the election and all this is taking place, there's a sense of deflation. There's a sense of depression. There's a sense of feeling like there's just no exit, and they feel like they're stuck in a prison. And that is what tends to happen when you were originally bought into a state of lack. It's a state of lack. I went through the same thing in the last 4 years. I was experiencing the human perspective from a state of lack because I was using these situations dealing with who's in office, who's in power, etc., as a justification for not having peace, not having love, not having these certain things. And that's also a state of lack. So I'm not any different than you guys. I suffered from the same things. We all do. But that is what it comes down to, is that these states of lack do not serve us, and they only separate us from our connection to Source or God. And I actually think that's what 2020 has taught me, is that even though I understand and I'm aware and I have this ability to connect with these states, I also have overly bought into the human illusion, the state of human suffering as being the reality in instances. And I reacted to that. But that's human. That's why we're here. We're here to have a human experience. We don't have to have it every single moment of every single day, but it's a human experience nonetheless. And every single master has gone through the process. Every single master who came before has had to endure the same scenarios as well. So it's not like the minute that you are enlightened or awakened that you no longer have any issues or problems in this universe. No, that doesn't happen in this physical environment. But you are able to survive, to expand beyond it. You're not limited to those experiences, okay? I'm going to jump through here to see if y'all have any questions about the material. I'm not doing readings, y'all, but any of the material that we are covering, to see if there's any questions that I have to answer for you guys, okay? Michelle, what if the mind suffers from depression? Does this affect your spirituality? Depression, it depends on the kind of depression. There's physiological depression, which is a state that is produced by a psychological experience or psychological effect. And that is something that is no different than if someone has, like they have a missing limb or they have cancer and they have to go through cancer. Sometimes those experiences where someone is physiologically affected by a form of depression, it is a state that is granted at the highest level. Nothing happens in the universe without source permission. Nothing. We are source though. So we've allowed ourselves to buy into the limitations of those states. Now, if you try all your might to overcome the sense of depression and it's not going anywhere, this means that there's something in that experience for you that serves your life in some way. We are not designed to be perfect human beings here. We're designed to be human beings going through circumstances and having perspectives for the purpose of our soul's development. So if someone suffers from a physiological condition, you can use that experience to essentially derail your entire life, or you can still live your life using that condition to help you evolve and develop and grow as a person. So some people suffer from schizophrenia. Some people suffer from emotional depression because there's a physiological effect. And if it's not going anywhere, no matter what you try, that means that there's something there that you are designed to learn through that experience. But when it comes to just being depressed because you just feel disillusioned, you feel sad, you feel disappointed with people, those are different forms of depression. And those aren't usually based in physiological conditions. Those are usually based on perspective. And if we hold a perspective that this is all there is and we're stuck in this reality or we're stuck in this situation, then yeah, we're going to feel depressed because we feel stuck and trapped. And it's a natural expression of our psychological state. Let's see. Okay, so that's that one. Let's see, let's go over here. Question about the book or the That's it. Yeah, that's it, guys. That's it. So no more questions regarding A Course in Miracles and what I just covered. So, all right, guys. I love you all. Thanks so much for tuning in to our study group. And I will be back on Friday. And remember, our study group on Friday is Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh, which is one of my favorite books. So I look forward to connecting with y'all then. Until then, hopefully y'all have a good rest of your night, and I will see